Hello, everyone. Gemini here. Thank you so much for being here today. Today, we have an amazing guest, Ruby Garcia. She is a leadership and development consultant, career and mindset coach, and hypnotherapist. Ruby is best known for working with first generation corporate professionals, Latinos, Latinx, or Latinx professionals and women facing careers and life transitions, combining a mix of professional development and a deep commitment to human fulfillment. Ruby supports her clients in being who they want to be so they can achieve their goals with speed and velocity. Her specialties include leadership development, career management, personal branding, overcoming imposter syndrome, life coaching, and hypnotherapy. She is currently writing a book about Latina leadership that will be published in 2023. Thank you so much, Ruby, for being here. I'm so excited for our conversation, for our partnership. It's truly an honor to know you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. It's been such a great opportunity to really get to know you. I've loved the conversations that we've had so far. And so I'm really just looking forward to where we go today.
Yes, where does it go today? And honestly, I feel like the first time I saw you, I was like, oh my God, like I have to connect with her. I love your like energy, right? Like I met you on LinkedIn. This is usually like the case, right? Like for me, I love to like network with people on LinkedIn, but there's certain people that pop up to you, right? Like certain people that, okay, you're good, you follow them, etc. But there's people like I have to reach out to this person and actually like make a formal introduction, get to know them more. And you were that for me. And that's why I reached out to you. I was like, oh, like we have to speak. And it's so funny how we have some similarities, right, of like not fitting in our culture, like feeling like the outsider, all right, like we have to like be in this mold. And like for example in the imposter syndrome, I could really relate, and I feel like it's something that we have to normalize because I feel like everybody to some extent really experiences that. And it's kind of this thing that we're like, oh, we want to avoid it. But I feel like it's didn't grind into us. Like it's hard to even think to like separate that because it's like the fear, right? And so many systematic, I would say traumas that we have endured. So could you talk a little bit about that and how your journey has been to like be a coach and be here where you are now?
Yeah. So, I mean, imposter syndrome is real, right? Like, I think we've all felt it at different times. And I think it's important to address I always look at imposter syndrome in two ways. There's the internal, which is like our own self doubt, our own fear, our own you know, doubting whether we belong in the space that we're in. And then there's the external piece, which is really what you were talking about with the systems, right? Like, why are there so few people of color sitting at the table? I know for myself as a first gen professional, I was often the only Latina in the room, right? And so I think because of that, I wondered, well, you know, I don't really belong here, right? Or how do I fit in? Or I even um, I would say kind of tone down who I was in order to fit the corporate professional or what I thought a corporate professional should look like. But it wasn't, now looking at it, it wasn't really that I didn't belong. It was that there's systematic issues that prevent, us from being in places where we need to be. And so it's really important to distinguish that too. And then I think the third piece that it's not often talked about, and this is kind of fits into bucket one of the internal, um, the internal feelings around imposter syndrome is whenever we are growing, we're going to come up against it.
Yes.
It's just part of the process because we're going to do something or be someone that we haven't yet been before. And so that is like, it's the in between of where I am and where I want to be.
Yeah.
Right. So that's also a natural occurrence. And I think for me, like I said, I'm first gen college graduate, first gen corporate professional. I didn't have any idea what I was doing. My mom always, she has third grade education. She worked in people's homes or in factories. My dad worked on the railroad for 46 years. So I couldn't go to them to help me navigate the office politics. Like it just wasn't, as much as they wanted to support me, the advice I got was work hard, stay humble, keep your head down, and like someone will recognize you for your work, right? But that's not how things ended up. In my earlier career, it was easier because I think when you're driven, ambitious, and a hard worker, yeah, you can get up so far. But at some point, that same that same work ethic isn't going to take you to the next level. You have to be visible, you have to network, you have to make sure that you're getting in front of the right people, you have to find sponsors. So, imposter syndrome was really real. And it was, it's something that for me personally, I feel like has always been part of my life because in my family, I'm one of 4 kids. My mom remarried when I was younger, when I was about less than 2 years old, to an American man. Both my parents are Mexican immigrants, but my mom remarried after she was widowed to an American man. So in my family, I was like the only one from that marriage. I was born with a limb difference, so I was kind of different in that way. And so there was a lot of like kind of this feeling of being othered, or like, and I wasn't like my siblings, even though we were raised in the same household, like our personalities were different. So I had to really learn how to get comfortable with myself and really embrace every part of myself. So embracing my Latinidad in the workplace, embracing my disability as part of who I am, embracing the imperfections, and just, it's about radical self-acceptance, really.
I love that. It's really a process, right? And like you said, it was both in the home, right, in the workplace, maybe, school, and it's like you have to prove yourself and kind of embrace, and that's where the embracing part comes from. Like you realize that maybe the exteriors, yeah, they do affect you, right, in childhood, right, because that's what you're seeking, right, exterior validation or love or whatever, right, community. And you soon once you're an adult, you realize that like you have to find it within yourself and kind of give it yourself to yourself, because you're not going to find it elsewhere. And that goes for everything, right? And as a coach, I'm sure you kind of know, the concept that you preach it, because it's like, and I wish, the younger selves of, us will be like, oh, like, you find it within yourself. And it's like, yeah, that would have been helpful. But it was so nice to maybe receive it from others, right? But that's the thing, the systems, right? The beliefs, and our parents, right? The way that they were brought up, or the way that their brains are, kind of built, and all those things that they carry from, their parents, right? And all those generational traumas and stuff like that. And the lack of awareness, right? The lack of awareness, the lack of knowing what's needed, right? Before, our parents were just concerned about survival, right? Having a roof, food on the table, you have clothes on your back, you're good. You're good to go. Like you'll make it to
Yeah.
right. And like now we know that we have to be more embraced by our parents, by the outside world. Um, but yeah, it's really
We can't get there even until we do it for ourselves, right?
yeah,
Because
I was
I
just
think
gonna
for
say
so much of my life, I sought external validation, right? And that comes and goes, to be
that. Right.
honest, right? That comes and goes. And so if you are seeking external validation, for example, I've gone through several layoffs, and I know right now we're kind of in a period where there are mass layoffs going on and people are experiencing this. And so when I was laid off, all of a sudden I felt like I kind of lost my status, so to speak,
Oh
right?
my God,
Like
thank you
this
for bringing that up.
corporate professional, right? And like, I wasn't making the money that I was, and I didn't have the title, and all these things.
Oh my God.
And we so often collapse our identity with our careers instead of seeing them as two distinct things, right? Like I am not my work. If I don't ever coach another day, which I hope never happens because I love this work, but if I don't coach ever another day, like that doesn't change my worth. It doesn't change who I am. It doesn't change the contributions that I can make in this world. Like I am who I am, right? And it's so important that we don't seek that external validation, because again, things can change. And so when you really find that from within, when you start validating yourself, when you start approving of yourself, when you start loving yourself, when you start accepting yourself, then you will see that the world will reflect that back to you. So
Mm.
it has to come from the inside. And then when you have that internal confidence, it becomes unshakable because
Yeah.
right? And it's not always an easy process. And it wasn't for me. I had to go through really dark seasons in my life. Eckhart Tolle, the author, talks about dark night of the soul, right? Where it's almost like you feel like you're dying,
Mm.
and and everything is being taken from you. And I remember experiencing that after being laid off the first time I transitioned from employee to entrepreneur. Was very difficult. I didn't have the support, I didn't have the self-belief even. And
Mm.
so I went through that dark night of the soul. And I always say I wouldn't choose it, but I wouldn't change it, because it has made me so much stronger now, and I can relate to people in a different way, and I can sit with them in their grief, and I can remind them who they are regardless of their job, regardless of the size clothing they wear, regardless of the size of their bank account, right? And I can remind people you have infinite worth and value
Mm.
simply because you exist.
I love that. I really do. And what you just said for me, like, really struck a chord in many ways. And it was actually something that I wanted to, ask you. And for me, I'm actually in that similar boat, if you will, that, before, right, I got my degrees, I was working in corporate for like 8 years, and then I got laid off last year. And so it has happened now twice, if you will, like in the last 9 months. And it's like, oh my God, all right. Like when I go to networking events, before I would be like, oh yeah, like I'm a program manager, I'm a director in X and Y and Z, and I have a master's in public health and whatever, and you have this and that. But now it's like when I meet people, I have to like really embrace and internalize and give the same weight, if you will, to my personal endeavors, right? My personal projects is no longer this company, right, that is well known.
Yeah, and that's yes.
And so,
Yeah, and
go ahead,
sorry,
go
I was
ahead.
breaking up. Go ahead. No. Oh, I was going to say, and you point to something that's so common, and I think this is particularly common in the United States, is you meet someone, and one of the very first things they ask you is, "What do you do?"
Yes.
So when you're in transition, it's like, oh,
I do
like,
everything.
right, there's no title to lean back on, right? And I wish that wouldn't be the first thing, because I feel like when we ask, "What do you do?" for a I think it's even unconsciously. I don't think that people always do this intentionally, but I think a lot of times it's people in their brains kind of will put you in a box,
Yep.
label you in a certain way, or kind of rank you or whatever. And again, our values shouldn't have anything to do with our job. I spent a month last year walking the Camino de Santiago, a pilgrimage in northern Spain, and meeting people all over the world. Not once in an entire month, not once did someone ask me, what did I do? We talked about everything. We talked about people's reasons why they were there, things they loved, or common shared experiences while walking the Camino. We talked about struggles and burdens, and just which hostel we would stay at. And we talk about all these things, and some of the conversations were really deep, but we never. I think maybe towards the end, I had a friend that I think I shared some of the work that I did with, but it was so brief. It was like, and it was very towards the very end of the month, but it was never what the conversations were led with, right? It was usually like, how do you hear about the Camino? What brings you to the Camino? Are you doing the Camino for a particular reason? Right. And I just think that that's something that we can learn from.
Mhm.
What brings you to this event? Like, how do you know the host? Have you lived in this area forever? Like, what's your story? Leave it really open. But that is really, that can be a real struggle, I think, when you're in transition, just because it seems that we put a lot of weight on things that don't necessarily define us. Your job is what you do, is not who you are.
Right. Oh my God, that's big. And yeah, I totally agree. I feel like, what do you do is most of the small talk, really, like trying to get a conversation or see how we could relate or how we could work together, or like what you do, maybe we could collaborate, etc. Right. And so it's like the culture of like, oh, like, I mean, I like sometimes where it goes, right? Because you do get to know what people do and, where they've been and who they know, etc. But it's true. It's like that, okay, like what could you contribute kind of thing, right? Like
Mhm.
where do you come from or what do you know that we can kind of, and you could see it from different views, if you will. But yeah, yeah, I totally agree. That we can probably, and like you said, like we don't identify or we shouldn't identify with our titles, right? With our degrees, like that's not who we are. It's just a title. And learning to embrace that, like I'm not sure like from your experience, like how it was the transition, but like it has been hard for me, like to like, okay, like this is what I'm doing now. And owning it and knowing that, the why and that is very important, right? What you're
Mhm.
doing and it fulfills you, right? It's no longer like, oh, I have a high paying job or whatever, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there was something that you said that kind of made me think back to it too was oh geez, I kind of forgot my thought here. Just thinking so fast. Yeah. Oh, I know what I was going to say. It was about grief. You
Mm,
know, you said that it is hard, and it is hard. And I believe that part of the reason that it's hard is because there's grief.
mm,
Because when you lose a job, lose a relationship, lose a friendship, even maybe you outgrow each other, whatever the case is, there's a sense of grief with that. There's a sense of loss, right?
mm,
And it's not just the loss of that thing or that situation, right? Like the friend, the job, the relationship, but there's also a loss of expectation, a loss of dreams, a
mm,
loss of future visions, and then there's also the loss of who we were. So like as you like you're never going to be that person that you were when you were in that job, right? Like that is no longer who you are. It was a season that you went through, and like now you're moving into another season, but there's the loss of like the loss of identity, really, right? And it's not a bad thing, right? It doesn't mean that that's you know wrong or bad, or like I'm not putting judgment on it. It's just part of the process. But whenever we have that loss, we need to actually lean into it and go through the feelings, right? Like I would say, just feel the feelings. That's the only way through it. That's the only way through pain and discomfort is feel the feelings. But in our culture, again, we just want to get out of, like, I don't want to be in pain,
or
right? I don't want to
suppressing.
be in pain, right? But that we have to feel the feelings. We have to experience the grief so that we can move on. Because I believe grief is one of the emotions that we can get so stuck on that keeps us paralyzed.
Mm,
But when we move through the grief, then we can, move to the next version of ourselves, the next relationship, the next career, right? And we just have to look at it as, kind of this redirection, right? And look at, this isn't happening to me. And I think this is a really important mindset distinction, is looking at things, even though they might be challenges or obstacles or difficulties, and saying this isn't happening to me, and that implies victim mentality, right? But thinking like this is something that's happening for me,
yes.
and sometimes we can't see it because honestly it's hard when we're going through the middle of it. It's hard to be in the messy middle, and we do not have perspective yet,
Mm,
just like as I said earlier, when I was going through my dark night of the soul, I mean, I would have given anything to make that go fast. And let me tell you, it was a couple years. That it was not a small season. It was a very long season. But again, I wouldn't choose it, but I wouldn't change it because of where I am today. And that's made me who I am.
yeah. It's so big, and I feel like a lot of people, I mean, we were told right from, you mentioned your parents, like, do your job, get a good paying job, and, you know, quédate calladita, whatever. And that's like the culture really that really is ingrained in us is to like get a job, get an education and kind of run with it. And so I feel like now, right, as first generations, I'm a first gen too, we're like breaking that cycle or that mentality, and that takes a lot of work, a lot of courage, right? A lot of explaining sometimes, right, to our parents. Like for example, right, I'm not currently working now, and like every time I talk to my grandma or I talk to my dad or my mom even, oh, no te han llamado en trabajo, o esto que lo otro, right? Like they're expecting me to like, get a job very soon. And I don't know if that's what God has for me, fine. But like honestly, like at this point in my life, I've realized that that's not the route for me because I wasn't born or created to be in the corporate America, right? In those boxes that I'm supposed to fulfill. And it's so really exhausting to be in these, right, in these corporate roles where you're like so like micromanage, you figure it out or whatever, right? The red tape and all this jumbo that we have to like, and we have so much to offer, so much to like, dynamics that we have as Latinas, right? As a woman of color. And it's just like I'm over this like box, over these red tapes. Like, we have to like create our own. And
Yeah.
I'm so proud of you. You're doing it, girl.
Yeah.
You're doing it. And it's not easy, like you said, but it's possible.
Yeah. And it's, you reminded me of some of the cultural scripts that we face too, right? Because even with the hardworking culturally, like that's one of the things that we're known for is being so hardworking, right? And so there's that, again, there's that, it's almost like your self-worth is based on how much you can produce, right? How you're being productive, how you're contributing. And it's, again, we have to step away from some of those barriers. And what you're doing right now is breaking down barriers and that are generational and limiting. And it's not to say that like working in corporate isn't good. I was worked in corporate for 17 years. It served me when it served me. It served me until it no longer served me.
Yeah.
Right. And then I knew it was time to move out. And my family has not always been very supportive about my entrepreneurial endeavors, and I had to really work through that because again, culturally, you want the approval. There's so much collectivism. We always think of collectively we, and I had to I really had to put some boundaries in place to say like, listen, I get that you don't understand it, and that's okay, but this is what I'm meant to do. And like,
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to do. Right. It's between me and the creator. And that's all I know. Like, and at the end of my life, I don't want to look back with regrets of I should have, or I would have, or, if I could turn back time. No, I want to be knowing that like, hey, I am leaving a legacy based on the life that I lived that was true and authentic to who I am, and who I was always created to be.
Yeah. That's so beautiful. Thank you. It is so true. And a lot of people are living in the other space of like, oh, my family thinks I should be here, so maybe I should, or my partner thinks, I should get a job, so I have to. And so it's hard to like break that cycle of expectations and norms, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
But also, my next question to you, I know that you're kind of an expert in this area of like self-sabotage. And it could go in many different ways, manifest in different ways. But what advice would you tell somebody who's kind of battling with that, right, of self-sabotage and wanting something different, but really like neglecting to do it for maybe different reasons, right?
Yeah. One is just get out of your own way. Just get out of your own way. Usually the biggest barriers that we face are not the external barriers, it's within ourselves. We limit ourselves on a practical level though, right? Because that sounds really good, but it's like how do you do that, right? And so what I would say is start to notice your patterns.
Mm,
Like start to think, if you were observing yourself, what patterns are you engaging in that look like self-sabotage? So some of those might look like people pleasing, right? Doing things to meet other people's approval. I would say that's a huge self-sabotage, or people pleasing, over taking on too much, so then that you feel like overwhelmed and you can't get anything. Uh, um, oh, let me think. I don't know why I'm like falling through. Procrastination is one. Perfectionism is another one. Perfectionism, I had a coach tell me, perfectionism is just fear dressed in couture. It's just, it looks good, but it's still fear. It's just another version of it. You can self-sabotage, uh, by thinking that you're not ready, right? Like, it's funny, I've done a couple of podcasts this month, but I remember I was invited to my first podcast about 8 years ago when I first became a coach. And I was like, no, I'm not ready. Like, I can't go on. And I turned down the opportunity, right? Like, I turned it down because I didn't think I was ready. And it took me that long to be able to own my own voice. There was a lot of work that I had to do even as a coach. And so it's why I've always worked with coaches and therapists to support me, right? Not asking for help is another way that we self-sabotage ourselves, looking for external validation. So there are all these ways that we can self-sabotage. So I would say, notice how you're doing it. Like, what's the pattern for you? Is it putting it off to the last minute? Is it not having any boundaries, right? So notice what it is and just be observant of it. And then start to notice, what is the trigger or driver that leads to that? Because usually there are some signs before that, right? Like, you might notice that you keep pushing dates out, or you might notice that because you want it perfect, you're not putting content out as fast as you could. So notice what are the triggers, and then it's like, what kind of strategies can you create in order to do that? For me, I'll be really honest, I'm not very accountable by myself. Like, if I'm the only one that I have to be accountable to, I'm just not very good, because I will procrastinate, But if I know that I have, if someone else is counting on me, or if I have to, be accountable to my actions, then I make sure that I get it done. So for me, I create a lot of structure. It's why I've worked with coaches. It's why I put things in my calendar. It's why I make sure that I have deadlines, because I need the structure, because I know that's my weakness, and I'm okay with it, right? Like, it just is what it is.
Yeah.
But I make sure that I put structures in place to help me stay accountable, because on my own, I'm just not always that reliable, right? And so I strengthen my muscle. What I needed to do 5 years ago, now maybe I don't need so much hand holding, because now it's become more of a habit or discipline. So it does progress. But I think the biggest thing is starting to observe, and then notice what the triggers are, or red flags leading up to it, putting strategies in place. And I think that's part of it right there. And then getting supported, right? Getting supported, whether it's a coach, a mentor, a friend, a peer, there's plenty of different ways to do that. Just if you put it on your calendar, just making sure that you are putting structures in place that are going to keep you accountable.
Yeah, that's huge. And I feel like we all suffer from that to one extent, right? To maybe a small extent or very large. And to your point, of needing structure, I'm just the same way, any structure, right? I create like systems and things like that work. I could probably do better because of that, right? Like transitioning from somewhere where it's like so structured and so like micromanaging or whatever, tapes and stuff and all that stuff. And then like, okay, now you're a business owner. Now you're the one doing stuff. You're the one setting the deadlines. You're the one creating the content, etc. Right? Like nobody's here like policing my actions, right?
Right, exactly.
Because I'm the one that is decided to do this and I'm the one doing it. Like there's nobody else supervising me or whatever. And so yeah, that takes a lot of like mindset and discipline, and it's like changing who you are basically, of like all you've known and all you've done.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. It's a lot of the work that I do is really about unbecoming so you could become, because we've been conditioned in so many different ways. We've been conditioned by our family, our parents, church, school, media, right? And there's all these the gender roles, right? Like, there's all these ways that we've been conditioned, and I feel like that is part of the work that each of us need to take on for ourselves, is like peeling back the layers of who we were told we should be in order to uncover who we were destined to be.
That's great. We all have to do that.
Yeah. And of course, the shameless plug is like, you can also use hypnotherapy and just, you know, take a shortcut. That's why I love, you know, with self-sabotaging, it's like you can do all the work and notice, and that's okay. Like a lot of people do that, right? I mean, you can rewire your brain. That's the awesome thing about our brains is there's, you know, neuroplasticity. And so you can rewire your belief systems. And with hypnosis, you can take a shortcut too. So you don't have to do all the investigation of like, why do I do this thing, right? It's not about knowing the why. It's just like, what are the core beliefs that are keeping you from getting to where you want? And then like, it's like a garden. You don't pull out the weeds, right? Because the weeds will come back. You want to get to the root. Once you pull the root out, you don't have to worry about it growing back. And so that's a lot like how hypnotherapy works, is getting to the root of the issue. So that way you can, you know, reach your goals faster or show up the way that you want to show up. You know, I deal when it comes to imposter syndrome, kind of circling back to the very beginning, is probably the what I've done the most hypnotherapy around is imposter syndrome from the internal standpoint, because underneath imposter syndrome a lot of times is the feeling of not enoughness, right? I'm not brave enough, I'm not bold enough, I'm not smart enough, I'm not loved enough, I'm not accepted enough. And so we work through whatever those core beliefs are on the unconscious level. And I have every single time people tell me that's not what I thought would come up. Yeah, because 90% of the time, or I mean, sorry, 10% of the time we're thinking with our conscious mind, but our behaviors and thoughts are actually driven by our unconscious. That's 90% of the time. So that's why I think it's so effective to match hypnotherapy with coaching and combining the two, because it's about bringing the unconscious and the conscious into alignment.
That's huge. I was actually going to ask you like what benefits, you know, and you kind of covered that already of like hypnotherapy. And it is something that I've thought of, right, of actually doing. I never really actually, you know, go through with it. I'm a little scared, to be honest. I'm like, I don't know what's gonna come up. But yeah, I do want to do it now and see what.
It's really, you know, I think there's a lot of fear because we don't know what it is. We don't understand it. We've only seen what's in the movies, which by the way is not accurate whatsoever. Like, you know, one of the biggest myths is that, you know, as a hypnotherapist that I'm going to do something to you, right? Like I'm going to put you, you know, into some type of crazy trance or make you dance like a chicken or whatever. Right. And it can be used for entertainment purposes. Don't get me wrong, but like, I can't make you do anything. And you are completely 110% aware of what's going on. We are actually, so when you are doing hypnotherapy, we're a partners. I'm just a guide kind of, you know, leading you, and all the answers are within you. I'm just helping you find those answers, right? But you're in a meditative state, which is called a trance, but you are perfectly aware. You know what's going on. It's not like you're gazed out. There's no little circles coming out of your eyes, right? And the way that you can think about it is, if you've ever driven even down the road, you know, maybe you go to the same place every day, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh, like I kind of zoned out for a second, right? And all of a sudden you're like, oh, I passed things and I didn't even realize it. That's actually a trance, right? Or when you watch a movie and you feel like you're in the movie and you're experiencing the emotions because you're watching it, and maybe you're crying or laughing or whatever it is, and you feel like you're part of it. That's also being in a trance, right? So it's actually not anything that's woo. It's just visualization. And so, you know, a lot of times, depending on, you know, what the goal is of the hypnotherapy, you know, it's really just trying to get you into a relaxed state so that you can connect with yourself. There's a lot of visualization and imagination that we use as a form to get you the answers that you have within yourself. Again, I'm just the guide kind of holding space and facilitating the process, but it isn't as scary. When I went through my hypnotherapy certification, I went through it to experience it. It was a little also apprehensive, right? And then I realized, oh, okay, I still have full control. I know what's going on. No one can make you do something or make you believe things that aren't in alignment with yourself too. That's the other thing, right? So I can't suggest something to you that wouldn't be aligned to some of the values and beliefs that you already have.
Hmm, that's great. It actually segue into my next question. Um, I know you're very wise and have gone through, different transitions in your life, right? It's from corporate to business owner, but like if you could have some time with your inner child, whatever age you think will benefit most of your current self, what would you tell her?
Mm.
And what age are you speaking to?
So I would probably speak to my 12-year-old self.
Mm.
And I actually had this experience. So while I was walking Camino de Santiago, actually, I don't think I've shared this with anyone. So this is the first time I'm sharing this. Um, but no one, I haven't written about it. I haven't like this has been a very personal part of my journey. But while I was walking Camino de Santiago, there is a landmark and it's called Cruz de Ferro, the Iron Cross. And so it's about, I don't know, maybe halfway through its pilgrimage itself is 500 miles. So it's, you're walking every single day and it's probably about the halfway mark is Cruz de Ferro. And it is a very simple, I guess, statue. It's about a 16-foot pole with an iron cross at the top. And then it sits a little bit on like a mound, I want to say, not even a hill, like a mound of rocks. And what it is over since this pilgrimage has been around since medieval times, and people leave rocks with them, right? They leave rocks with them as a representation of what they're leaving behind, a burden, forgiveness, something that they're letting go of. And I distinctly remember, I knew that I wanted to. This is I didn't walk the full 500 miles because of time. So I walked about 300. I started at the very beginning and ended at the end, but there were some parts that I skipped. But I really wanted to go there, but I wanted to go open hearted. I didn't want to force something or, I wanted whatever that I needed to release to be organic. And I've literally had a rock with me in my hiking pack for 7 years that I carried with me, that I knew that one day, because I wanted to do the Camino for so long, I knew one day I'm going to leave this rock at Cruz de Ferro. And that is going to symbolize, the letting go of whatever comes up. And so that morning that I was walking, I was probably about 9 miles into my walk. I was very, very sore. I was really struggling physically because the first part of your Camino is really about it's a physical it's a physical journey in the beginning. And I was just struggling. I remember thinking to myself, I don't know if I can do this. Like maybe this was just too much. I don't know that I'm strong enough. I don't know that I can go the distance. Like this is hard because I was walking on average 16 days or 60 miles a day. And it wasn't just walking, like it was like climbing, hilling, hiking, going through mountains, right? My first day was going through the Pyrenees mountains. Took me 12 hours.
Wow.
So like, it's not like a little walk that you take around the block, right?
Right.
So I was just like emotionally exhausted that day. And I remember thinking like, I should just quit. And it's funny because I heard the voices of different people I knew that were like, you could do this, you can keep going, and that's what really encouraged me. And I remember getting to being close to Cruz de Ferro. And as soon as I saw the cross, like I wanted to fall to my knees, but I didn't want to be that person that seemed so exaggerated. But I was so overwhelmed. I mean, I was like just bawling. Like I didn't even know, it was part of the emotional and, or the physical that was worn out. It's emotionally exhausting. And I saw the cross and I just started crying. And I went and I laid my rock down. And it was, like I said, I didn't want to think about in advance what it was going to be and what came up for me. And it was funny because it wasn't the thing that I thought would come up, because I thought it would be something related to family and forgiveness or something like that. it was all about, and this goes to the younger self, it was all about how harsh I had been to myself as a young child, how critical I had been, how judgmental. I was bullied really bad when I was 12 years old because of my limb difference. And, it was a terrible experience. Boys, pounding on tables in the cafeteria, calling me like the three-fingered bandit. I mean, I took that with me into adulthood, always thinking that I was never enough, right? Like that 12-year-old version I carried into adulthood. So I was a 40-year-old woman, but I still was like acting like that wounded 12-year-old bullied kid, right? And and so that's what came up for me was like, you don't need to be so harsh to yourself. Like, and I just told my inner child, like, you're loved, you're accepted, like what they did was wrong and it has nothing to do with you and it doesn't change your value. And I'm sorry that it's taken me so long to realize like the value that you have. And I'm sorry that I didn't tell you sooner how much you're valued and just how much you're loved. And I mean, I say it calmly now, but let me tell you, I was a mess.
Oh, yeah.
Like it was so emotional to think that that was the thing that came up was like, I had to forgive myself for being so hard on me and carrying that. I didn't even realize I was carrying that burden for so many years. But really, when I got there, like it became very, very evident. And so to me, being at the Iron Cross was really about self-forgiveness.
Wow. I love that. I just want to take a moment to embrace you. And that takes a lot of, bravery, work, to actually go through the process, right? And that's probably just one of your ages, right? Because we as adults probably have different ages or transitions or traumas, right? Um, that we kind of internalize and it makes us who we are in different negative and positive ways, right? And so just doing that, the act of like acknowledging that inner or younger self, right? And like embracing what they went through and forgiving them or acknowledging, all the trauma and things that they went through. Like I feel like that's so important, but yet so foreign to us, right? And I feel like if we would have or we would, do more inner work, like we would like what would happen from there, right? Would be
Yeah.
better human beings and be more healed and more versed, more aware of our actions and ways and behaviors and all that stuff. So that's very big. So I'm so proud of you that you did that. And I'm sure it was, very overwhelming, right, to go through that process. But
Yeah.
you
I mean, I
did
laid
it.
down that rock for 7 years. That's rock that I'd carried with me for 7 years. Right. And even that's a representation of, even though that, you asked me about the age, but I even thought of the 7 years that I had carried that rock
Mhm.
with me, knowing that one day I would do the Camino. I had gone through a divorce. I had lost a job. I had to move back in with my parents. I had to, with two kids, right? Like it doesn't feel that great to be doing that as an adult, right? I had gone through so much. And so when I laid down that rock at the cross, because that's what you do is you leave your rock there, it was really symbolic of letting go of the burdens and being okay with it and being okay with where the journey took me. And I got to tell you this part because the best part of it was walking away. I get back on the trail to continue walking because I'm still not at, that was not my final destination. That was like the midway point of that day. And as I'm walking there, the beautiful trees and plants, and it was kind of very hilly, but just tons of butterflies swarming everywhere. I mean, it was like, I was like, really? This feels like from a movie, you know what I mean? And it was so magical because I thought, what a symbolic way of letting go, right? It's the whole, I mean, everything that a butterfly signifies of transformation, of hope, of metamorphosis and the beauty, right? Coming from being in a cocoon and then like turning into the butterfly. And so I mean, and it went on for a while. It wasn't even just like as I got off on the back on the trail, it wasn't just that little point. It was like, I mean, I have video of it because I thought no one would believe me if I told them this, like, right. But it was like a scene from a movie because there were just butterflies everywhere flying. And I literally felt so much lighter. I felt the burden had been lifted.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it makes me emotional and like almost like goosebump moment, you know, like when you feel the intensity of that feeling or that, feeling that you felt. And you know, like I do believe, in God and miracles and everything, right? But um just like being in that moment and knowing that, you know, there's hope, right? There's opportunity in that letting go.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it makes it so much better to know that. And the butterflies were like filling you up and loving you and dancing you. So that was awesome. Just thinking of that experience for you, that's great. And
Yeah,
if you tell
it
me,
really became it
go
really
ahead.
became the transition from like I said, the physical in the beginning of the walk was very difficult for me. And that Iron Cross was very pivotal for me because of the, forgiveness and everything. But also it's funny because that also marked for me personally, where it was no longer about the physical pain of enduring every day and walking. It really then turned into more of you know, um, the mental and spiritual part of the journey.
Mm, I love that. I feel like that's life, right?
It completely is. I mean, the Camino it is an analogy for life because we're
Yeah.
all on this journey. We're all, on the Camino, you're walking with other pilgrims. And it's like, in the end, we're all just walking each other home and we belong to each other. That's the other part. We do belong to each other, kind of going back to what you were saying at the beginning and how, I think one of the things that we felt in common where we didn't always feel like we belonged, right? But I realized on the Camino, like there's people from all over the world, right? I mean, I met people from Korea, from uh, Ireland, from Australia, from the United States, of course. Like meeting all these people, and it's like we were all just. It is a analogy of just the journey inward, right,
Mm,
and then the journey of walking together.
that's beautiful. I'll look into it. Maybe I could do it someday. I like nature, so maybe that will be, but yeah, the physical activity, I'm gonna suffer.
It took a little training. I think
Yeah,
everyone's
that's gonna be hard. Just knowing it from the description you have given. It's gonna be a journey for me too. So just to conclude, I mean, this has been an amazing experience just to like talk to you. And I feel like, we're connected, we really have many similarities, and it's just so beautiful to have this conversation with you and see how you have transformed into this beautiful human being and you continue to grow, right? And in this essence, I want to ask you, what is the legacy that you want to leave in this world?
Mm. It's funny when I was on the Camino, and I didn't think this would turn into a Camino conversation, but it kind of has. I actually thought about a lot about legacy.
Mm,
I didn't think a lot about too much, to be honest. I was very, very present, but probably the last week of my journey, the last 5 days, this topic of legacy very much came up, and I thought about Paulo Coelho, who wrote The Alchemist,
mm,
because he said in the book he talks about it's everyone's responsibility to discover their own personal legend. And so I was thinking to myself, he had also walked the Camino, by the way. He had walked the Camino and then wrote The Pilgrimage and then later wrote The Alchemist. And it was on the Camino that he actually decided to become a writer at the age of like 38 or 39 or something like that. So he was already older and he never written anything, he said, not even like, a poem. But on the Camino, he decided he wanted to be a writer. And so I thought about um, some of what he said and started thinking about what's a legacy that I wanted to leave. And I think there's a couple things. I think for I'm a mom to two boys. And I think part of my legacy, is really about them, right? And I want them to live a life that feels meaningful and self-expressed and feels in alignment with who they are. Like I'm not the type of parent that wishes like, oh, I want my kid to be like a lawyer or doctor. Like, I'm like, hey, you want to basket weave? You can basket weave. Just be the best basket weaver that you can be, right? Like, I don't really care. I just want them to grow up and, feel self-expressed and contribute to this world in a way that feels meaningful to them. So I definitely think my kids are a huge part of it. And then for me, I think it is actually one of the outcomes of the Camino for me was, in terms of legacy, was what do I want to leave behind? And the other thing was that I really wanted to support Latina professionals in particular, because we're both first gen. We know how hard it can be to navigate a system that wasn't really designed for us. And there were a lot of things that I didn't know about navigating corporate. So it took me a lot longer to get where I was when I was in corporate. And so I wanted to be able to leave tools for other people to do it faster, right? So they wouldn't have to go through the hardship. So they wouldn't take them like, 15 years to figure things out like it took me. So that's I hope will be part of my legacy, is the book that I'm currently writing about Latina leadership, about navigating the workforce as a first gen Latina. And it's not just the how to in terms of strategy, because I could just talk about personal branding or, leadership, but I'm also talking a lot about the mindset as well. So that's the other thing. And then I think third is just, the third part is really just, I really want people to know that they are worthy, right? That their self-worth is inherent, and it is inherent, right? That they are designed to, be their authentic selves. They have a purpose. I want other people to uncover their personal legends. And I guess I really want to be part of that journey too. And so, but I just want to be the reminder that, hey, you have purpose, you have meaning, you have something to contribute in this world. And it looks different for all of us. And that's the beauty of it, because we don't all have the same roles, right? But we all have something to give. And I think those are the areas.
I love it. Thank you so much. That's so beautiful. Thank you for being here, taking your time and sharing all your life experiences, your knowledge, and your love with us today. Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we have this platform for you anytime that you want to come on. You're always welcome. Um, and thank you for being beautiful and a light in every room that you walk in.
Oh, I appreciate you.
Thank you.